If you like our videos, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell icon. TLDR US is the weakest of our 4 channels, so if you want to support its continuation, we'd really appreciate it. So we're making this video because over the last week or so, a number of polls have come out showing that Biden's approval ratings have actually fallen, and fallen significantly. YouGov polling found that Biden's approval rating had fallen 9 points, from 48% in August to 39% in September, a net rating of -10. Pew Research found that his approval rating had fallen 11 points in 2 months, from 55% in July to 44% in September. Gallup polling found that his approval rating had fallen 6 points, from 49% in August to 43% in September, a net rating of -10, the lowest approval rating of any post-war president apart from Trump at this point in their first term. You get the point. Basically, every polling agency is finding that Biden's approval ratings are actually dropping below 50%. So, what's happening? Well, there are basically 3 reasons: COVID, the dragging economy, and his recent foreign policy blunders. Let's start with COVID. Thanks to the Delta variant and a faltering vaccination campaign, the US is suffering another wave of COVID. Deaths have risen to about 2,000 a day, from less than 300 in July. Certain states, like California and New York, have implemented some sort of vaccine passport scheme to try to encourage vaccinations and stem the virus. But across the US as a whole, vaccinations are slowing. Back in April, the US vaccination rate was the highest in the G7 apart from the UK. It's since fallen to the bottom of the pack, largely because Americans are uniquely vaccine hesitant. Some 17% of Americans are unwilling to take the vaccine, with a further 10% unsure, the highest rate of vaccine hesitancy in the developed world, besides Russia. To put that in context, that's about double most other developed countries. In the UK, for example, just 8% are unwilling to take the vaccine, and 4% are unsure. Anyway, whether or not it's actually Biden's fault, this has predictably hurt his poll numbers. Pew polling found that the number of Americans who were confident in Biden's ability to handle the pandemic has fallen from 65% in March to just 51% today. The second reason is the economy. As the US vaccinated its way out of COVID, the economy took off at an incredible pace. Unemployment fell, consumer confidence was high, and generally everything was going pretty well. Unfortunately for Biden, COVID's resurgence and inflation fears have slowed everything down. In August, employment rose by 235,000, taking the total unemployment rate down from 5.4% to 5.2%. This might sound pretty good, but it was a fair bit lower than expected, and well down on the 1.05 million jobs created in July. The other thing that had consumers worried is inflation, which we did a video about on our global channel last week. Essentially, for a whole load of complicated economic reasons, possibly including the fact that the US government has injected about $6 trillion into the economy to cope with the COVID pandemic, stuff has started to cost more. Inflation, which basically measures how much more expensive things are in dollars compared to a year ago, was 5.3% in August, meaning that goods are, on average, about 5% more expensive than they were last year. These fears have been compounded by the current global commodities crisis, which is pushing up energy prices across the world. Now, it's worth noting that economists disagree as to whether this inflation is transitionary and will go away in a bit, or a more permanent problem. We're not going to get into this debate now because it doesn't really matter who's right, at least from Biden's perspective. All that will matter to Biden is that Americans are currently worried about rising prices, and this is hurting his poll numbers. According to Pew Research polling, 63% of adults say that they are very concerned about rising prices for food and consumer goods, making it Americans' foremost economic concern, ahead of employers being able to hire workers, people facing eviction or foreclosure, or people who want to work being unable to find jobs. This anxiety has translated into less support for Biden's economic agenda. Just 48% of Americans have confidence in him to make good decisions about economic policy, compared to 56% in March. The last problem for Biden has been his foreign policy blunders. A lot of commentators, and especially Democrats, were optimistic that Biden represented a return from Trump's slightly chaotic Twitter diplomacy to a more conventional and perhaps more competent foreign policy. While Biden has definitely been less active on Twitter than his predecessor, his foreign policy hasn't been particularly competent. There was the AUKUS shenanigans earlier this month when Biden offended Macron by failing to involve them in negotiations, leading to the withdrawal of the American ambassador to the US. But by far and away the most obvious blunder would be the US's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. The mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country. How many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war? And Afghan troops will not.
Again, we're not making a judgment on whether Biden was right or wrong to pull out of Afghanistan. It's just that the American public weren't impressed by how he handled it. According to YouGov polling, only 33% approve of Biden's management in Afghanistan, while 55% disapprove, including 25% of Democrats. This is the case even though more Americans think the original engagement in Afghanistan was a mistake than believe the decision to withdraw was an error. Unsurprisingly, this has made Americans less confident in Biden's wider foreign policy agenda. Just 45% have confidence in him to make good foreign policy decisions, down from 56% in March. So, those are the three big reasons Biden's approval ratings have dropped off. But should he be worried? Well, any president should be a little worried when their approval ratings fall, but Biden probably shouldn't stress it too much. Biden's approval ratings are following a familiar trend. Presidents usually get a honeymoon period straight after elections when their approval ratings are higher than usual, and they drop off a bit as time goes on. According to Gallup polling, apart from Donald Trump, every president since Harry Truman has enjoyed a so-called honeymoon period, so Biden's poll slump is to be expected. It's also worth noting that the last 4 presidents to win re-election hit similarly low marks in their first term. Barack Obama was at 42% well into his second year, George W. Bush fell to 44% halfway through his 4th year, Bill Clinton was at 42% near the end of his 2nd year, and Ronald Reagan reached 35% at the beginning of his 3rd year. The midterms are still more than a year away, and obviously the next presidential election isn't for another 3 years, so Biden has time to turn it around. But what do you think? Should Biden be worried about this poll slump, or is this just what happens in politics? As I said at the start, if you like TLDR US's videos, then we really could do with your support. Just subscribing and ringing the bell is useful, but sharing the videos is also great. Anyway, we really appreciate it. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible, and if you want to see your name at the end of the videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's down below.